What's up, guys? It's Monster Rez. We are back with another Thriller Thursday. And today's lesson is masks. Where do they come from? How did it start? What's the industry like? So let's get into it. All right, so in 1938, a man named Don Post made Don Post Studios. It started as kind of like a novelty kind of gag shop, celebrity masks at the time, caricatures of certain types of characters and, pop culture media at the time. His popularity increased a lot. So around 1948, he made the first ever licensed mask, and that was the Frankenstein mask. Because of that, the rubber rates were going down at the time because he was using so many of them to manufacture. Not to mention that they were just getting out of a war, so it was kind of bad timing. One thing that was really cool about Don Post is obviously they were kind of like not the first FX makers, because Jack Pierce was, and all them boys, Chris Mueller and Jack Caven and Bud Westmore and them were kind of the firsts. But Don Post was kind of those guys where you can go, hey, can you make this for us? So in 1956, they were able to do something for this movie called Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And they made the pods that people get duplicated in, which I think is like pretty dope. In 1947, since, people are always gonna be inspired, two companies arose with this, this inspiration of monster masks, Bayshore and Topstone, all at the same year in 1947. These two companies were able to make some really cool designs, especially Topstone, because it's one of the more famous ones. But Bayshore originally started as a blow mold company making Halloween decor, and then maybe around the 50s they started making Halloween masks like Don Post did. Topstone originally started because of Keith Ward doing the same thing as Don Post, making celebrity masks and caricatures. Not until close to the late 40s, early 50s, he started making monster masks. And around this time, he made one of the most influential masks known to man, named the Shock Monster in 1956. This mask is one of the coolest masks ever made. It has so many different looks, but it was originally called the Horror Mask. Around the Famous Monsters era, James Warren renamed it to the Shock Monster, which, it was a great clutch, Mr. Warren, man. Yeah, he did great. And I'm just letting y'all know, I may not be accurate with some of the dates or some of the, descriptions of the events. I forget things sometimes, but I try my best to hold on to as much information as I can. Bayshore made their first mask called Zombie in 1950. As you guys know, Zombie originated from the 1938 film I Walked with a Zombie, which featured a man with big bulging eyes and walked around like a dead dude. So that's what kind of arises the term zombie. So the Bayshore Zombie is one of the first ever zombie masks ever made, and it is a rarity to come by an original. My good friend Devil's Workshop, who I interviewed last Thriller Thursday, he was able to get his hands on an original and make some out of a mold and made some really cool Bayshore Zombies, which I'll showcase right here. All right, so we're back to Topstone, we're back to Bayshore, we're back to Don Post. Don Post was doing its usual thing, making, cool monster masks, making Teenage Frankenstein masks and stuff like that. Really cool stuff. But let's focus on Topstone right now. In the 50s, Topstone had a really good chokehold on the monster kids back then. He was making really cool designs, such as the Shock Monster, the Ghoul, Spasm, Graveyard Devil, a lot of cool pieces. Really great characters. The problem is that they were cheaper than your average, mask nowadays, where it's like, $200, $500, $60. They were $6 back then, which I don't know how much that equals to now, but it wasn't as much money back then. It was really cheap. So these kids are looking at the drawing and they're like, man, this thing looks sick. I can't wait to get in the mail. They get in the mail and it's just a heap of rubber shit, literally. The hair is all matted around, the paint job is really bad, the mask is super thin. You can't even tell what the design is. But kids seem to kind of like it. Maybe some did, maybe some didn't. I don't know. That was the main problem. While Don Post was still crushing it and Bayshore was most likely doing their thing, the 60s arrived. And this is when Don Post got their second major licenses, the Munsters and Universal Monsters. During that time, they were able to sculpt a bunch of characters from the Universal Monster films, Frankenstein, the Phantom, the Wolfman, Hunchback, Dracula, Gillman, the Mummy, all that noise. So they were able to do that. It first started with, I believe, Hollywood Horrors. I may be wrong on that part, please correct me. It started with Pat Newman, and she did an amazing work. And then it went to the 800 line, which was Jack Kamen, Ellis Berman, and a little bit of Pat Newman stuff. And that stuff was just beautiful, spot on. Around the same time, 1964, they made the Munsters masks, which are actually kind of hard to come by. There's around 2 variants for the Herman Munster mask. One's, I think, him smiling, and one him's just normal. And around that time again, they started making deluxe masks pretty much. And that's kind of where the really famous designs came out of, like the craggly face Glenn Strange and the Phantom and the Gillman, you know, the stuff you see on Pinterest or comics and stuff like that, really cool stuff. The thing that made it deluxe was the added feature of hair, customization by Vern Langdon. Vern Langdon was able to cater to customers while, you know, Don Post was just able to like, okay, let's just get the mask out and stuff. Around 1966, Pat Newman had to resculpt the Glenn Strange mask. And the Glenn Strange mask in 1964 was taken off of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein's Glenn Strange face. It was too smooth. People coined the term smooth Frankenstein, which re-released in 1974, but we'll get to that later. The craggly face Frankenstein was resculpted by Pat Newman in 1966, and I believe it had a new debut in the Monster Calendar or the Monster Rule number 6 with the Santa hat, the most iconic, you know, Frankenstein image of all time. Duh, I mean, it's pretty cool. The 60s were a really triumphant time for monster kids. Famous Monsters was just booming, 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 boy. You know, Eerie Comics, Creepy Comics, EC Comics. I mean, the thing was going crazy, and masks and merchandise and shirts and movies, really bad movies, were the hit back then. All right, guys, unfortunately that's the end for this video, but I just wanted to say part 2 is coming real soon. This is just the first part of it, man. We were covering from the 30s all the way to the 60s. 30 years of amazing monster mask history, and there's so much more. So stay tuned for part 2. Stay tuned for more mask companies that are going to arise and do some cool shit. All right, guys, you know, click on the socials, do your thing, follow us, stay tuned. Monster Kids for life.